This week we are looking at the Christian missionaries and the establishment of an empire in Africa. And this is under our course unit called African Christian Theological Method. In this first lecture, we are looking at the description of African Christian theological thought. African Christian theological thought can be defined as a deliberate ordering of ideas and the self-conscious articulation of an African theological position. For many non-African theologians, African Christian theological method is still a project, the reality of which has to be realized in future. Such non-African theologians have given the impression that African theological articulation is in a state of disarray. They argue that 1. There are no African theologians who have distinguished themselves in their fields of expertise to the level of people like John Macquarie, Paul Tillich, and the like. 2. That there are no major theological systems that command as wide support as those found in Europe and North America. This is because theology, according to them, is a scientific enterprise, a rational and critical reflection on the Christian faith. Thirdly, even the few available theological writings tend to be fragmentary and occasional, they argue. The impression here is that theology can only exist where it is systematically written down in books. Now, those who deny the existence of African theological articulation humbly acknowledge the reality of African Christianity and the existence of a vibrant African church. However, African theologians argue that some of the recent works by people like Desmond Tutu, though not an academician but a working practical theologian, Christologies of John S. Mbiti, give evidence of systematic theological intent. Although the present African method of doing theology creates some problems, there are a number of advantages to this approach. For instance, there is greater ecumenicity in doing theology in Africa. An African theologian is free to draw upon the resources of different Christian traditions. If there is any one characteristic that sets the African theological situation from that one finds in the West, it is this manifest pluralism of theological traditions. Christianity in Africa is conceived far more broadly, and traditions outside Christianity are taken so seriously by African theologians. Another positive feature in African theological method is the increased recognition among African theologians that theology, for all its reliance on tradition, is a constructive and risky undertaking. African theologians argue that what has previously been said cannot simply be taken for granted. For instance, the methods African theologians have received from the West have evolved over time, and Africans themselves have contributed to their future development by the way in which they have appropriated and applied them. African theologians feel that they had better take responsibility for what they say theologically and for the way in which they say it. In seeking African theological method, the tendency has been toward a kind of laissez-faire approach, with thematic rather than undertaking a unified approach to the exposition of Christian doctrine. Apart from a few African theologians, the majority of them do not consciously work at a systematic presentation of their theological ideas. Their statements are usually occasional comments arising out of specific situations. The challenge today is on how to build an authentic African Christian theology so that it may be called scientific or academic. The hindrance has been the Western background and the continuing domination in the execution of academic research. In their theological method, African theologians try to be properly scholarly and genuinely African. The question is, can a genuinely African way of using Western methodology be effective? This is what we are going to deal with in the subsequent lectures.